This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. Let's pause and take a moment to talk about something very important. Life has its pressures for everyone, and we often carry the immense weight of expectation to never show weakness, to hide our true feelings, and believe that asking for support somehow makes us less of a person. But bottling things up isn't the answer. It can often lead to feeling down, burnout, or other unhealthy habits. We want to normalize the idea that it's okay to struggle. Real strength actually comes from opening up about what you are carrying and doing something about it so that you can be at your best for yourself and everyone in your life. If you're feeling the weight of the world, or even if things just feel a bit off, I can't stress enough the value of talking to someone. It could be a friend, a loved one, or a therapist. We here at This Week Explained believe that therapy can be incredibly valuable. Whether you've been in therapy personally or not, the broader benefits are clear. It's so helpful for learning positive coping skills, understanding how to set healthy boundaries, and it really empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it's so important to remember that therapy isn't just for those who've experienced combat or major trauma. It's a tool for anyone looking to improve their mental well-being and navigate life's challenges. That's why we're thrilled to talk about BetterHelp. With over 5,000 therapists in the UK, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it clearly resonates with users, boasting an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also incredibly convenient. You can connect with a therapist at the click of a button, helping you fit therapy into your busy schedule. And you can even switch therapists at any time if you feel it's not the right fit. And here's something special for our listeners. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is offering our listeners 10% off their first month. What are you waiting for? Talk it out with BetterHelp. Once again, our listeners get 10% off their first month by going to betterhelp.com/thisweek. That's BetterHelp.com/thisweek. Tired of feeling overwhelmed by the headlines? Want to truly understand the why behind the global chaos? Then you are in the right place. Welcome to This Week Explained, your weekly deep dive into the most complex and impactful stories shaping our world. I'm Tiana, and joining me as always is Kervin. Before we jump into the crucial developments of the week, a quick favor. If you want to ensure you never miss an episode, make sure you're following or subscribed on your podcast platform. It literally takes 2 seconds and keeps you instantly updated. And if you are getting value from what we are doing here, a simple rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And don't forget the new interactive comments on Spotify. It's a fantastic way to engage directly with the show and other listeners, extending the conversation beyond the broadcast. You can also find more fantastic podcasts like ours by visiting leonmedianetwork.com, part of the awesome Leon Media Network. This week, we're tracking a world teetering on a volatile equilibrium, a moment defined not by shifting front lines, but by a dangerous escalation in the strategic depth of conflict, where internal crises and external pressures are pushing nations toward high-stakes gambles. In Ukraine, this tension is twofold. On the battlefield, it's a war of strategic depth. We'll cover the exchange of strikes as Ukraine hits a major Russian oil export terminal far from the front, while Russia relentlessly bombards Kyiv to deplete its air defenses and cripple its energy grid. But as Ukraine races to mass-produce its own interceptor drones, a serious domestic crisis is emerging. We'll unpack the major corruption scandal in the state energy sector, reportedly implicating allies of President Zelensky and threatening to destabilize the country from within. In Gaza, a 1-month-old ceasefire is facing an incredibly precarious next step. We dive into the fundamental deadlock of Phase 2, the demand for Hamas to disarm, Israel's refusal to accept a new transitional authority, and the global reluctance to deploy a multinational security force. We'll also look at the immediate flashpoint in the Rafah tunnels and the growing fear among regional officials of a de facto partition of Gaza, with 95% of the population confined to less than half the territory. Meanwhile, we're seeing an historic and controversial recalibration of U.S. policy in the Middle East. We'll track the White House visit of Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, a man known until months ago as terrorist leader Abu Muhammad al-Julani, with a $10 million bounty on his head. We examine the pragmatic deal. Syria joins the anti-ISIL coalition in exchange for the suspension of Caesar Act sanctions. But as Washington gambles on this rebranding, we'll cover the disturbing reports of sectarian massacres that raise the core question: is this a statesman or a warlord? In the Western Hemisphere, a massive projection of U.S. military power is underway. We'll cover Operation Southern Spear, a deadly counter-narcotics campaign that has killed over 80 people and is drawing warnings from legal experts for violating international law. We analyze the deployment of the USS Gerald R Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, and ask why hardware designed for a land attack is being used to hunt drug boats, as President Trump is briefed on options for military strikes inside Venezuela. And finally, we will succumb to listeners' demands. As new files related to Jeffrey Epstein are released, we'll analyze a wag the dog scenario raised by a longtime listener, Ian Brown 7085, who asks, is this military escalation in the Caribbean a high-risk attempt to create a distraction from a scandal that strikes at a fundamental red line for the American electorate? It's a world of strategic gambles and precarious stalemates. And as always, we are going to start in Ukraine and focus on the battlefield, where this volatile equilibrium is being tested by escalations from both sides. All right, Karim, this week feels kind of like a snapshot of the entire war.
Yeah, it really does, especially for the winter months, Tiana. And what emerged from the week's events is not a significant shift in the front line, but it is a clear escalation in the strategic depth of the conflict. This is coupled with a serious domestic crisis that's actually emerging in Kyiv against those very close to President Zelensky. So it gives us a lot to consider regarding the question of a potential off-ramp for the conflict. And that remains a central point of our analysis this week.
Exactly. Let's begin with the military actions. We saw Ukraine strike a key Russian oil export terminal, a major infrastructure target far from the front lines. Almost simultaneously, Russia launched another significant aerial assault against Kyiv. So what does this exchange suggest about the current military strategy for each side?
Well, I think it demonstrates both tactical capability and strategic necessity. So for Ukraine, targeting major infrastructure like this oil facility, which I will say handles a large portion of Russia's maritime oil exports, this is a logical next step for them. It's a direct attack on Russia's ability to fund this war effort. So they're using domestically produced long-range weapons to reach deep into Russian territory, which now demonstrates an ability to inflict meaningful cost on Moscow far beyond the immediate battlefield.
And this comes as President Zelensky framed these actions as a response, especially following the recent Russian strikes that hit civilian areas and infrastructure within Kyiv.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And for Russia, the massive drone and missile attacks serve multiple purposes. First, they are punitive, so it's retaliatory strikes against Ukrainian cities. But second, they are a persistent attempt to overwhelm and deplete Ukraine's vital air defense systems. And I would say, lastly, these attacks continue the campaign to cripple Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and that causes significant hardship through blackouts, especially as the winter months approach. Now, as we have said for a while now, this is a war of attrition, not just on the battlefield, but against the morale and economic backbone of Ukraine.
And speaking of air defenses, we learned that Ukraine is now attempting to counter this threat by initiating mass production of its own interceptor drones. This seems like a crucial domestic response.
I think it's a strategic imperative. So when Russia is using hundreds of glide bombs and drones almost daily, and reportedly planning to increase that production, Ukraine cannot rely solely on finite and very expensive Western-provided air defense missiles. So manufacturing a low-cost or lower-cost indigenous counter-drone system, this is an attempt to move the country toward a more sustainable defense posture. This is a necessary adaptation to Russia's evolving tactics.
So we're seeing a war where both sides are expanding their domestic weapons capacity and striking deeper behind enemy lines, which effectively raises the stakes. Now, let's pivot to the other major development this week: the corruption scandal that has emerged in Kyiv, reportedly implicating individuals close to President Zelensky in the energy sector. This seems highly destabilizing at this particular moment.
Yeah, I think it's an immense challenge for Kyiv to manage. So, reports this week revealed a significant alleged skimming plot at the state nuclear energy company. And it reportedly involved business partners of the president and some other high level officials in Ukraine. This is happening while the Ukrainian people are enduring blackouts caused by these Russian strikes and after the state has spent considerable resources trying to protect that very infrastructure.
The timing and nature of these allegations present a serious challenge. President Zelensky has welcomed the investigations, but reports of such corruption during wartime, particularly in the critical energy sector, raise concerns for Ukraine's internal unity and its international partnerships.
Yeah, this is a significant vulnerability. While action is reportedly being taken by Kyiv, I want to say that this situation creates leverage for Russia. It also complicates Kyiv's relationship with its Western allies, and those Western allies provide critical military and financial aid, and they require accountability for that support. Now, the Trump administration ran an entire presidential campaign on not sending more aid to Ukraine based on similar allegations of corruption. Those allegations of corruption were blown off by some of those in the United States as Russian disinformation, and Kyiv now has to manage both the external military conflict and this internal challenge of corruption.
Which brings us back to the central question that we have posed before. How does this conflict find an off ramp, and what could victory look like on either side? Because right now we are looking at a stalemate defined by escalating internal and external pressures.
Yeah, the key difficulty, Tiana, is that a simple withdrawal for President Putin is politically fraught. A retreat without a demonstrable victory that could provoke internal instability within Russia and that potentially threatens Putin's hold on power. Now, I would say, from my analysis, a minimum requirement for an off ramp is likely a settlement he can portray domestically as maybe not a tactical success, but a strategic success.
And as for President Zelensky, a victory must mean defending Ukrainian sovereignty and integrity. Conceding territory is not a viable political option for him. So, how do negotiators find a peaceful arrangement where both capitals can claim success?
Yeah, this what you just posited there. That is the central diplomatic challenge. So, a solution, I think, lies in highly complex and nuanced security guarantees for Ukraine and political settlements that avoid absolute definitions of victory or definition of defeat. So, it could involve formulas for demilitarized zones, or maybe some complex language around future security architectures. The goal would be to offer both leaders a narrative that allows them to end the immense human and financial costs of the war while proclaiming victory.
The diplomatic path seems very, very narrow, especially with the military escalations that we have seen this week. The concern we must always consider is that if President Putin cannot find a viable off ramp, if he cannot secure that narrative of victory, the strategic escalation could move beyond Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that's the core geopolitical threat here. The current dynamic is an attempt by both sides to gain leverage before any potential future negotiation happens. But if the pressures, both domestic and military, become too great on the Russian side and the cost of the status quo outweighs the perceived risk of expanding the conflict, then the danger of a wider European war increases. The stability of the continent is tied to finding a resolution to this internal political requirement for a perceived victory.
It is a tremendously heavy weight resting on these nuanced diplomatic terms. We will certainly be watching President Zelensky's upcoming visits to Paris and Madrid, as those conversations will be crucial in defining the security and financial support needed to maintain Ukraine's position. But for now, we need to shift our focus. We are 1 month into the Gaza ceasefire. And while the initial phase did halt the broader conflict, all eyes are now on what comes next. World leaders, including the G7, are focused on implementing phase two. But, Curvin, from everything we are seeing, this next step seems incredibly precarious.
Yeah, I think that's the correct word there, Tian. It's very precarious. So phase one was, in relative terms, very straightforward. Stop the fighting, exchange hostages for prisoners, and then we You and I saw it. I think the whole world saw how difficult even that was to maintain.
The
Now we have
whole
this
back and
phase two.
forth. The whole
Right.
back and
Yeah.
forth. They're like, "No, you broke it. No, you broke it."
Yeah, absolutely. We saw that on multiple occasions. We had decided that the keeping the ceasefire was going to be unlikely, right? And each day saw that play out. Now we're in phase two, and that's all about the day after the war, right? It's about the fundamental long-term structure of Gaza. And then, look, frankly, every party involved has a red line that directly contradicts the red line of the other.
So, walk us through those core requirements. What does phase 2 actually demand?
There's three main pillars. We- and I say each one has a significant obstacle to tackle. So, first, it requires Israel to fully withdraw from Gaza. Fully withdraw. We see how difficult that has been for Netanyahu to go through with. Secondly, it requires Hamas to completely disarm to allow for a new transitional governing authority. And then third, it calls for a multinational security force to be deployed to keep the peace in the region.
All right, so let's start with the last two because they seem completely deadlocked. I mean, why did they agree to this ceasefire if they didn't actually plan to follow through with it? Because they knew what was
Y-
in the ceasefire, they knew what was in phase 2, and now they're like, no, we don't actually want to do this.
Yeah, you know how sometimes you agree to things and you go, "That's a tomorrow Tiana problem," or "That's a tomorrow Curvin problem." I think that's
Yeah.
what we're seeing in this. That's a tomorrow problem.
That's a
Let's do
tomorrow
this now.
problem. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, they're deadlocked. Hamas has stated that it will not disarm, and Israel has stated that it will not accept any involvement from the Palestinian Authority, which is the most likely candidate to be that transitional authority. So, where does that leave negotiations?
Would you be surprised if I told you that it's a great place to be for the negotiations? Yeah, you'd probably be surprised because it is not in a good spot. Look, this leaves them at a stalemate. These are not minor negotiating points we're talking about. They are fundamental disagreements. And from Hamas's perspective, their arms are their only leverage and guarantee of survival. Now, from Israel's perspective, they're not going to accept a governing body that they see as either ineffective or hostile or both of those things.
And this multinational force, it is one thing to call for one, but who would actually send troops?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? We are seeing private U.S. documents that express serious concern that phase two may fail simply on the point you just brought up. Nations are extremely reluctant to commit troops to such a volatile situation. They do not want to be caught in confrontations with local factions, and without clear goals or a unified agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, this is a mission that most countries see as having no viable path to success.
So, we have these massive long term diplomatic hurdles, but I am also reading about an immediate flashpoint that could threaten the entire truce right now. This situation is in the tunnels beneath Rafah.
Yeah, and this is a very dangerous situation. This is what's kind of led to those breaks in the ceasefire in phase one. And that is because there is a group of Hamas fighters, estimated around 200, who are trapped in these tunnels. Now, Hamas is demanding safe passage for them, and Israel is, so far, refusing that demand.
This sounds like a microcosm of the entire conflict.
It is, right? It's all based on that trust issue, right? Neither group trusts the other group. So we are in a high stakes standoff where neither side wants to blink. So any move at this point would probably be seen as a violation of the ceasefire, which we don't want to see. And there was a suggestion of a possible amnesty for fighters who lay down their arms, and that was proposed as a potential model for success here, but has not resolved the immediate impasse. This one incident could be the trigger that unravels this entire ceasefire agreement.
So, If phase two is stalled by these disagreements and the ceasefire itself is threatened by these immediate flashpoints, what is the practical outcome? Like, what does this mean for Gaza itself?
Look, the primary fear that we're all hearing, both from European and Arab officials, and the Arab officials, particularly Jordan in this case, um, they are looking at a de facto partition of the territory.
And what would that even look like?
Well, look, right now, Israel currently holds a significant portion of Gaza's territory that holds more than half of the land there. But the vast majority of the Palestinian population, 95% of the population of Gaza, is living in the other half. So the worry is that this temporary military line becomes a permanent hard border for Israel.
And that would have massive implications for a number of things. But one of the top issues would be reconstruction, right?
Yeah, exactly. You could see a future where reconstruction and aid are limited only to the Israeli controlled areas. That would leave the rest of the territory very isolated. It would essentially formalize a separation. This is an outcome that regional partners are desperately trying to avoid. The U.S. administration is maintaining a publicly optimistic stance, but this risk of fragmentation is very real.
It is a sober reminder as we navigate this process in Ukraine of how fragile the post war environment actually is. And we are far from a stable conclusion in either of these conflicts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the first phase here brought a necessary pause where we saw the release of hostages and prisoners. But the core issues, we talked about this from the very beginning, the core issues that started the war were never addressed. And now it is those core issues that are blocking the path to peace.
A truly precarious situation, as you said. This challenge of building a lasting security framework is not unique to Gaza. We are seeing similar, if very different, security and political developments playing out in other key areas. The world is on the brink of major conflict, and I promise we are going to unpack that. But before we get into all that, I want to give a huge thank you to the folks powering today's episode, Fresh Roasted Coffee. They make it possible for us to bring you this deep dive analysis each week. And if you're like me, you know that a truly great cup of coffee is essential for processing this much information. That is what fresh roasted coffee is all about. This isn't coffee that's been sitting on a shelf for months. They roast your beans to order, so it arrives at your door at absolute peak freshness. But it's not just when they roast, it's how and what they roast. Their entire production facility is powered by renewable energy gathered on site. They source specialty grade USDA organic beans, meaning you're getting a cleaner, better tasting, and more sustainable cup of coffee every single time. It's high quality, ethically sourced, and roasted with precision. They've set up a special offer just for our listeners. To get the best deal, you must click the link in our show notes and enter the code this week. That's THISWEEK to get 20% off your first order. It's genuinely some of the best coffee you can buy, and you'll be supporting the show, so check that out. Now, as we mentioned before, we are seeing security and political developments very similar to Gaza playing out in other key areas. And Carmen, I have to admit, my head is spinning from the news this week. The Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa was welcomed to the White House by President Trump, and they looked quite chummy, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely an historic moment. He was actually playing, saw videos of him playing basketball with two U.S. military leaders who actively targeted this man for death. So that was quite interesting, however you want to feel about that.
So weird. That's so weird. That feels
Yeah,
icky.
yeah, right. Yeah, and this is the first time any Syrian leader has visited the White House since the country gained independence. So this signals a complete recalibration of United States policy in the Middle East.
It is a massive shift, but let's be very clear about who this leader is. This is not just any political figure. This is Ahmed al-Sharaa, who, until very recently, was known to the world as Abu Muhammad al-Julani.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is the central tension of the entire visit. So until 4 months ago, he was the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. So a group the United States officially designated as a terrorist organization. He had a $10 million bounty on his head. He was even a prisoner of United States forces in Iraq for several years.
And now he is in the Oval Office with the president praising him, saying he believes this leader can do it. This rebranding from jihadist to statesman is remarkable. And honestly, it's unfathomable. So, what is the strategic driver for this? What does Washington get from rolling out the red carpet for a man with this kind of past?
Well, if they get a close ally in a strategic counterterrorism location, right? That's why we keep like when we talk about Israel, that is why the United States keeps coming to Israel's defense. They are a close ally in a strategic location. The centerpiece of this agreement is that Syria will formally join the 90-member global coalition to combat the Islamic State.
This is very interesting because were they not already cooperating on this?
Yeah, they were, but it was happening quietly. They were doing this under the table. We know of at least 22 joint operations in the last month alone, where the U.S. advised, assisted, and enabled. And those are specific military operational terms: advised, assisted, and enabled Syrian forces. This new agreement makes that cooperation official. It opens the door for Syria to receive open access to the Pentagon, to formal intelligence sharing, REL Syria, and potentially to American arms and technical assistance.
Hmm. So it brings the entire counter-terror apparatus out of the shadows. And in return, what exactly does Syria get?
Well, they get legitimacy. I think more importantly, they get economic relief. So immediately after the meeting, the Treasury Department announced it was suspending the Caesar Act sanctions, and they were going to do that for 180 days.
So a suspension, not a repeal.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical distinction there. The administration has signaled that it supports a full repeal, which would be necessary to truly rebuild the Syrian economy and encourage regional investment. But only the United States Congress can issue a full repeal. And there's already significant resistance on Capitol Hill for approving this. So for now, we're seeing a 6-month suspension, and that is the primary carrot for Damascus.
And it is not just sanctions, but diplomatic relations are also resuming. Syria is being allowed to reopen its embassy in Washington, which has been closed since 2012.
Ilya, this is a full scale normalization. It's contingent on continued cooperation. So if Syria decides not to cooperate anymore, if he is a warlord and not a president, they will go back on this. The United States will go back on this, and it's also a major geopolitical move here. I've seen some analysts calling this as Syria purposely pivoting from the orbit of Iran, Russia, and China and wanting to become an ally of the West.
This must be sending shockwaves through the region. I mean, two groups come to mind immediately, the Kurds and the Israelis. So, what does this mean for them?
Yeah, these are the two most sensitive external factors. So, for the Kurds, Syria announced a plan to integrate the Kurdish led Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, into the regular Syrian army. This is a monumental development. For years, the SDF was the primary U.S. proxy force. Now, they are to be merged with the state army.
And for Israel, we know President Trump said he was working with Israel to get along with Syria.
Yeah, right. And as typical, there are no formal de escalation agreements that were announced. Um, your typical Trump hyperbole. And I think this is the key missing piece. The United States stressed its support for a security agreement, but as of now, that does not exist. Israeli forces are still active, and they still occupy territory in southern Syria.
This all feels incredibly fast and it feels optimistic, but The war only just ended last December when al-Sharaa toppled the Assad regime. So, what are the stability risks inside Syria? We're hearing very disturbing reports.
I think this is the single greatest vulnerability of the new policy. The country is far from peaceful. There are widespread reports of violence, there's reporting of sectarian clashes.
The reports that I have seen mention violence against Bedouins and Druze militias and pressure on Christian and Kurdish minorities.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the most alarming reports by far are accusations that al-Shara's forces have committed a sectarian massacre against members of the Alawites minority. Now, that group was the group that Bashar al-Assad belonged to. Critics, including leaders of the Alawite community in the United States, are warning the White House that this is evidence of an al-Qaeda mentality. They are making the case that you cannot erase that ideology, and they are warning the United States to be careful.
So, the core question is whether this is a genuine transformation or just a strategic rebranding. Is Washington betting on a statesman who can rebuild a nation, or are they enabling a warlord who simply won the war?
Yeah, the calculation the Trump administration is making is that a unified Syria under al-Sharaa, even with his past, is preferable to a failed state and a power vacuum. So they are gambling that he can and will control his forces, and that will cause him to move past his roots. But look, these reports of sectarian violence are a primary red flag here. This entire strategy hinges on whether he can build a state, not just lead a militia.
It is a massive gamble with the stability of the entire Levant at stake. And while that high stakes situation unfolds in the Middle East, a completely different and perhaps more surprising story is developing much closer to home. There is a significant amount of military hardware and personnel moving in the Western Hemisphere. The Pentagon has been active, and last week, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made a formal announcement on social media about a new operation. So, what is this and what is happening in the Caribbean?
Yes, in this announcement, he publicly informed the world of the latest named operation in the U.S. Southern Command, or Southcom AOR, or Area of Responsibility. It is called Operation Southern Spear, and according to Secretary Hegseth, this is a mission with the stated goal of defending the homeland by removing narco terrorists from the hemisphere and securing the U.S. from illicit drugs.
Narco terrorists, as we have discussed many times, is very strong language, and this announcement follows weeks of kinetic action. This is not just a new development, is it?
No, definitely not. The operation may have been officially named last week, but the campaign itself has been active since at least early September. This has been a deadly campaign. U.S. forces have hit at least 21 different vessels in 20 separate strikes. That's pretty good, I would say, if you're talking about numbers, both in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific.
And we have discussed in past episodes that these strikes have resulted in casualties.
Yeah, like at least 80 people have been killed. Now, the U.S. position is that these individuals were narco terrorists, but there's not been much official information released about the targets or their specific affiliations. Now, in a few cases, officials have claimed the targets were tied to Tren de Aragua, that's the group that the administration designated as a foreign terrorist organization earlier this year.
But reports from the region, including one from the Associated Press, suggested some of those killed were low level traffickers, possibly driven by poverty in their situations and not necessarily high level cartel leaders.
And to me, that's not surprising. This happened and probably still happens in some small capacity in the conflict against Islamic State and other terrorist organizations. The quickest, easiest way to go from target development to target elimination is to develop low-level targets. These same low-level Islamic terrorists are also driven by poverty. It's not just ideology. But it does highlight the profound questions about the legality of this operation in the Caribbean. The administration has insisted these strikes are legal. They frame them as self-defense. They've argued in a confidential note to Congress that the U.S. is in an armed conflict with drug cartels, and they define these drug cartels as unlawful combatants whose actions constitute an armed attack against the United States.
Bold. I mean,
Let's see how it turns out, right?
okay. I mean, that is a novel legal argument and one that is not universally accepted. Let's be real here.
Yeah, it is not. Yeah, legal experts, and that includes a former chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, have stated that these strikes could be illegal. They could violate international law by targeting civilians and could even be treated as crimes against humanity. There are also domestic constitutional questions because only Congress has the power to declare war. So if we are in a drug war, Congress is going to have to approve that. Now, President Trump himself said the U.S. is allowed to strike vessels. Well, there you have it. Case closed. But he also did say
because
he
he
also
said it. That's how it
yes,
goes. That's how it is.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, you have to trust all people. No,
Politicians.
just
Trust all
right.
politicians, you meant. Yes.
Obviously, we're being a bit sarcastic there, but he also, in the same breath, did say that he may go back to Congress if the campaign expands to a land conflict.
He may go back to Congress?
He might.
Wouldn't he isn't he supposed to, since Congress is the only branch of government that can declare war? No?
Tiana,
No?
come on now. You trying to live in
Rules
reality?
for thee, but not for me, says this administration. Rules for everybody else, but we can do what we want. Okay.
Yeah, that's been the United States for quite a long time.
Yeah, true. Except now everything's on the internet.
I think we'll get to
Okay.
that soon.
Yeah, we're getting there. And that brings us to the hardware. The assets that are being deployed seem disproportionate for interdicting drug boats. I mean, the USS Gerald R Ford, the world's largest and most advanced aircraft carrier, is in the Caribbean. I think it's just because Hegseth just wants to show off. Like, this is for himself more than anything else.
I mean, there are a ton of I think excellent theories as to why this is happening. You know my theory with the China-Taiwan situation.
Right.
That is the strike group. It's the carrier strike group you are going to want to have in close proximity to reinforce naval vessels in the Indo-Pacific. Other people have other opinions on this. I think we'll get to at the end of this episode. So stay for that.
Mm-hmm.
But look, we're looking at a full carrier strike group with guided missile destroyers and amphibious assault ships inching closer to Venezuela. We've got U.S. combat aircraft in Puerto Rico. Long-range bombers have flown near the Venezuelan coast. It is collectively the largest U.S. military presence in and around Latin America in decades.
All this for cocaine.
I mean,
Crazy.
people have done stranger things.
Okay.
For
Well, I know it's not just cocaine. I know that's
I know, yeah.
I know that's minimizing everything, but still. Anyways. All right, so let's talk about this aircraft carrier. Analysts have noted that a nuclear-powered supercarrier is not the ideal tool for counter-narcotics.
Understatement of the year as we close out 2025. Yeah, the USS Ford is not well suited for counter-drug operations. It is well suited to attack adversaries, either at sea or on land. Something else I think few are talking about with this, a carrier strike group is a powerful and in-demand asset. It cannot stay there indefinitely. It will either need to be used or it is going to have to stand down.
Which points everyone's attention, except yours, directly at Venezuela. Washington has been explicit in linking this to President Nicolas Maduro.
Yeah, the administration claims that the drug smuggling is happening in cahoots with Maduro. This, of course, has raised alarms. President Maduro called the deployment the greatest threat our continent has faced in the past 100 years, and he accused the U.S. of fabricating a new war. Now, in response, his defense minister announced a massive nationwide mobilization of troops and civilians for defense exercises.
Okay, then, in this context, what does massive mean?
Well, according to their defense minister, we're seeing nearly 200,000 troops deployed throughout the national territory. This is part of what they call the Independence Plan 200, a response mechanism to strengthen defenses against the U.S. presence.
The Independence Plan 200. It sounds like either like a kitchen appliance from the 50s or maybe a broom from Harry Potter. Because the
Oh, yeah.
lightning bolt. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I could see it
Anyways,
as like an infomercial. Get your
yeah.
Independence Plan
Plan
200.
200. You liked Independence Plan 100. Wait till you get a
Oh,
load of the upgrades on the Independence Plan 200. All right, that's enough out of me. All right, let's bring it back. So this brings us to the core question, Kervin. Is the U.S. preparing to attack Venezuela? We now know President Trump was briefed on this very option.
so, yeah, the president was briefed this week on a set of options for military operations inside Venezuela. This did not include a decision. This did not indicate a decision was imminent, but the options were presented to top officials, including Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
So, do you have any insight into what kind of options were floated at this meeting?
Now, I do not have the official concepts of operation that were presented, but typically this is what happens within an operation. Leaders will present several courses of action. They all have varying degrees of risk and severity. There were likely a range of concepts from airstrikes on military or government facilities and drug routes to a more direct attempt to take out Maduro. We also know the CIA has been authorized to conduct covert action in the country, though the scope of that, unfortunately for everyone, is classified.
Or at least for now, until someone decides they want clout.
Correct. Who wants to write a book?
Who wants clout? Who wants to write a book? Okay, so, or start a podcast.
Hey now.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You haven't said anything that you shouldn't say, so we're good here.
Right.
So we just look at the news, guys. That's basically, well, that's all I do. I don't know what you do.
That's
News.
I look at everything in open source, so
Yeah.
news, yes.
Yeah. So, all right. We have a massive U.S. force designed for land attack and a Venezuelan military mobilizing for defense. Does Venezuela even stand a chance in a conventional fight? Do you think somebody will come to their aid?
Oh, great question. I think in a conventional war, no, they have no chance. No one in the region can match the U.S. military. That's not hubris on my part. That's just a fact. The numbers play that out. Venezuela's military is ranked about 50th globally. Its air force is small. It's only partially functional. It is believed that only 3 of its F-16s can still fly due to U.S. sanctions.
So do you think someone's going to come to their aid if we do pick on them? Go after them?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. So they are aligned with Iran, Russia, and China, and I think maybe not overtly, but covertly, those countries will. There's highly likely that they are going to provide support if a conflict were to start in Venezuela.
Okay, so tell us more about, Venezuela's defenses. Like, what can they do here?
Yeah, look, so I know I said that there's no chance in conventional warfare, but they're not entirely defenseless. Venezuela has invested in Russian systems. They have at least 20 operational Su-30 fighter jets. Now, these can be armed with supersonic anti-ship missiles. These are a significant threat to the naval warships that are encroaching on Venezuela. The U.S. F-35s in the region are likely intended to counter that specific threat.
All right, what about on the ground?
Yeah, so on the ground, Venezuela's numbers are actually much larger. They have a total active military and paramilitary force of over 300,000. Now, experts say they are hampered by limited training and a focus more on internal security. Maduro doesn't want to be overthrown, so he puts his military on that. But their military doctrine, the Chavista doctrine, is based on being anti-imperialist. The military is politically and economically tied to the state of Venezuela. They are not expected to fracture.
So, what is their strategy?
I think this to be asymmetric warfare. Look, like I said, they cannot win a conventional war, but they can make the country ungovernable. They can make an invasion so costly that it's simply not worth it to invade.
So, we are in a state of high stakes pressure. The U.S. has positioned its assets, and Venezuela is digging in. It is an incredibly tense situation with a lot of moving parts and very high stakes, and that pressure is really the central theme here. We have been discussing the stated motive for Operation Southern Spear, which is counter-narcotics, and the geopolitical motive, which is pressure on Maduro. But we received a listener comment this week pointing to a completely different domestic political motive. And it is not just our listeners asking this. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker suggested this very thing on Wednesday. He voiced a fear that with the release of the new files related to Jeffrey Epstein, which he predicted would be devastating for Trump, the president might do anything to get a distraction in the news. His direct quote was, quote, "He might take us to war with Venezuela just to take it out of the headlines," end quote. This is all happening as thousands of new files were released and House Democrats forced a vote on releasing all documents, which Speaker Johnson says he will bring to the floor, I think on Tuesday. I think it was stated that they're going to vote for it on Tuesday. The White House, for its part, said Governor Pritzker is the one distracting from his own record in Illinois. Of course, got to deflect. So, Kervin, this brings us to our listener's question. Is this operation a wag the dog scenario? Are we seeing a potential foreign conflict being escalated to divert attention from a domestic scandal?
Yep.
I can't talk.
It's all good. I understood it.
My mouth was getting dry from rambling so much.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting theory. It's one that should be discussed. We don't like to get into these topics, but I do think it's important when military operations, geopolitics, and domestic politics kind of converge in one place. And anytime a sudden foreign policy crisis aligns with a domestic one, it deserves attention. But I think we should separate political probability from military probability. The administration's standard playbook, I think we all know this for domestic scandals, is to reframe the narrative, attack the media's credibility, right? Who do you work for? The Washington Post. Oh, you're no good anymore.
Fake news.
No one, fake news, get out of here. No one really listens to you. And also to pivot to political opponents, which he's done, right? He's calling on the Clintons to be investigated in this. Some of those, we won't get into what that investigation could tell everybody that absolutely no one wanted to know about.
Nobody wanted to know this.
So I'll just leave it at that. Look,
if y'all are curious, Google
do not Google.
works wonders. Google works wonders. If you're curious, if you're that morbidly curious, because it's yikes. Okay.
I will not be doing that. You said works wonders? Hold on. I'm just kidding. So we have seen this methodology deployed effectively for various scandals in the past. Starting a military conflict, though, even a limited one, that introduces a level of risk and unpredictability that is exponentially harder to control than a news cycle.
Maybe it's just a coincidence that all these things are aligning all at once. Like it could be because we want to have control over that part, because the Panama Canal.
Right.
And everything, because we want to be able to have easy access to the Pacific if we need it. I mean, that aligns with what's going on right now, and then, I mean, I don't know, it could just be a coincidence, it and Trump's probably just really excited that he has this particular, thing to distract from what's going on. I don't know. But, I mean,
Yeah, I love
obviously,
it. Keep going.
this scandal feels this particular scandal feels different, though, you know?
Yeah, I loved you working that out in real time there. Typically, you'll do that in your head, but I loved it. Everybody being able to hear that. Everything that you were saying, I 100% agree with. I go through all of those back and forths as well when I'm doing the analysis on here. And
So so you don't think that he is escalating this conflict with Venezuela because he knew that these files were gonna come out or that a vote was going to be forced? Because I mean, obviously, he didn't know when the government was going to reopen.
absolutely.
He did know. Like, he had total control over that whole situation, but since they started this conflict before the government shut down, it
Yeah, this
just
escalation was
yeah.
happening and in the works as the government was still shut down.
And I think
Millions of
he's
dollars was spent.
yeah, and I think he still felt like he had control over, the Epstein files or the Republicans in his little group, and he thought that they were gonna just be blindly loyal to him, and so I don't even know if he has the emotional capacity to have these files even register on his radar, like, at all. Probably didn't even think about them.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, that I was gonna get into. The variable here is the unique nature of the controversy. So you talked about how he thought he had, Republicans and the MAGA-based voting that were just gonna be loyal to him all of the time, right? But this is not a typical partisan issue. The administration itself, including the vice president, and President Trump's own son campaign on releasing these very files. Remember, JD Vance was on several podcasts saying to release the files. I think he said that to Theo Von. Um, look, that creates a significant political contradiction. Um, if you downplay why people want answers, heads are going to roll. Any topic, I think, any topic involving the harm of children is a fundamental red line for the majority of the American electorate, regardless of affiliation. This is not a Republican or Democrat, right wing, left wing conversation. I am seeing the fractures happen in real time on social media. The handling of this release. Did you see the photos right from like February, where they brought these right wing influencers to the White House to publicly show the binders for the Jeffrey Epstein files?
No,
Um,
I didn't see those.
okay, so I guess I should bring that up. Yeah, not everybody rolls in the same spaces, right? So in February, there was this big public demonstration on the lawn of the White House. Several far right wing influencers were invited to the White House to publicly show the Epstein files, right? And they had these binders that had the Epstein files written on the front of it, and these, I mean, disgusting to see the smiles on people's faces that they would be able to have the information of people who were abused, right?
Yeah, and not just that, those huge smiles on their faces were probably because they thought it would be basically just a bunch of Democrats being implicated in these files, because that was something else during the presidential race that they kept saying that they're all pedophiles, all the Democrats, all the left wings,
Yep.
they're all pedophiles. That was and so
Pizzagate,
yeah,
all those things.
yeah, ugh.
Um, yeah, so what we found out after the fact was that these were files that had been released right after Jeffrey Epstein allegedly killed himself in prison. And so nothing was new. And I think at that moment, the administration thought they could get these influencers, promise them clout, have this very public demonstration, and then everyone would just forget about it and just say, "Yeah, see, they released the files."
Yeah, we got to hold them in our hands. You don't get to hold them in your hands, but we do, and we get to put these on our Instagram profiles, these pictures of us posing with the files.
Right. And so the handling of that was very bad. That really is where that fracture from the MAGA crowd really started. They began to question, wait, what does this mean if the administration, it seems like they're trying to distract us from something.
Yeah, this is
Um,
not sufficient. We want to make these public. And everybody, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, you need to be torched if you're in there, obviously.
Absolutely. Yep. That has absolutely been the feeling of the majority of the people. It has not been, we want to see who's on that list so we know who not to vote for. It's, we want to see who's on that list and we want to actively destroy that person, because of what they're implicated in doing. And I think all of that is causing friction, among the president's most dedicated supporters. So his usual tactic of dismissing it, I don't think is going to be as effective.
Okay, so to answer the listener's question, do you think he would start a war over this? I mean, I honestly think it's coincidence, but he probably isn't mad that he has something to distract from it, you know?
Right. Yeah. And I still have it myself as unlikely. I think a rhetorical and political messaging campaign would be the most likely course of action here. But you talked about the Illinois governor and his fear. It's not entirely without merit. And I think it's not entirely without merit in one specific scenario. If the heat that he talks about materializes, if verifiable, tangible evidence surfaces that proves definitively devastating and moves public consensus in a way no other scandal has, then the desperation for a distraction, I think, would increase. So, in that specific high impact scenario, the potential for an unpredictable, high risk foreign policy decision would be considered by the Trump administration. But as of now, a messaging war is much more probable than a shooting war.
But do you think if something honestly, I think what has come out is it's pretty devastating thus far, but nothing has tied him to, the core, um, allegations. So if something does come out, do you think he's gonna be able to stay in office? Or, like, do you think we're just gonna be like, "Oh, he did do it," and then let him finish out his term?
I go back to verifiable and tangible evidence. If there is verifiable and tangible evidence that not only was President Trump on the island with Jeffrey Epstein, and not only did he know what was happening, he was complicit
Actively
in
participated
an
in
active
the
participant in
abuse,
this.
yeah.
He will not be allowed. The American people will not allow him to continue. And I think he knows that.
Okay, so you have seen all the recent releases. What is your opinion on whether President Trump will be, as you called it, verifiably and tangibly linked to the atrocities of Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, currently, I have not seen anything that has moved the needle for nonpartisans. To me, that means that no tangible evidence has really been released. We've seen the emails, right? Most of us have read what Epstein had emailed people, and the emails have been either vague or cryptic. And so, as of right now, Trump's base can think up reasons why this exonerates him, while his detractors can champion how this implicates him. We still do not have all the evidence in the public sphere, but to my analytical brain, it is very interesting that he had so many in his circle demanding the release of these files, and now once in power And putting these people in power, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, I'm not implicating anyone in doing anything, but these are people who were championing release the files, release the files. His own son, Don Jr., said we should release the files and hold all of those people who are in there accountable. So now that they're in power, these files somehow no longer exist. When that wasn't enough, they're not very important. Stop trying to distract everyone with these stupid Epstein files. But this is not going away. There's a large segment of the population whose entire personality is based on the release of these files. And those people who voted for Trump were for this main reason. And they are not quiet, and they are not going to stop fighting for this.
I hope so. This isn't something that should be swept under the rug. And also, I appreciate you clarifying and saying you thus far, have not seen anything that implicates Trump to the extent that would cause him to, lose his position or anyone else lose their position within government. Mainly, it's been about, well, never mind. Look it up, y'all. You know how to Google.
Don't look it up. Don't do that.
Just read the emails. They don't have to look at that stupid picture. But anyways,
oh man,
so that wraps it up. We did not want to talk about the Epstein files, but I mean that was a very important question that definitely needed to be addressed, and yeah. Not because
I'm very appreciative of the comments and asking the question and that the fact that we receive every time we bring up Epstein, even in passing, it becomes a comment on an episode. And I'm not saying that in jokingly or anything, but we appreciate the questions about it. I know it's important to a lot of people, and I don't feel like I am the right person to be talking about this from a political standpoint.
Yeah,
But
I mean, if you want us to talk about it from like a personal standpoint, yeah, light them all on fire.
Yeah, if you want our personal opinions,
burn them down.
that is a subscription only episode. And
we don't have a subscription.
This went off the rails.
Yeah, I don't think it went off the rails. I think we
no, it didn't.
Yeah, I think we stayed on topic. So. But yeah, we did need to address it eventually, especially because it started implicating other people outside of American politics in them as well. Because it had like the British, didn't it have like a British prime minister or something? And, or somebody within the British government. I'm not going to say it was the prime minister, but not the prime minister. Oh, what are they called? Oh, forget it. I'm not going there. All right. Yeah, so we did need to discuss it. Now that it's starting to implicate other people, other high-ranking officials in other countries and stuff. So thank you for the question. And thank you, Kervin. I think that your point about the political persistence of this is key. It's a reminder that for many, this isn't just a news story. It's a core motivator. Children need to be protected, and we're supposed to protect them. And that kind of energy ensures that this topic will remain front and center, regardless of what has or hasn't been released. But as we close out, is there anything else that you would like to discuss?
Yeah, I think that's it for now. I very much enjoyed that conversation and keeping it level-headed. So, thank you, Tiana.
I mean, as level-headed as you can keep it when discussing that sort of thing. Thank you so much for listening to This Week Explained. We hope that you found it both informative and engaging. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. For more in-depth coverage of these stories and more, be sure to follow us on social media at This Week Explained.
Tiana, thank you so much. And until next week, stay safe out there.